Good morning, everyone. This is Nathan Lindorf with The Rational Independent. Welcome to part 2 of dissecting why Salon thinks you're a crazy person if you don't agree with leftist politics. So yesterday we talked a little bit about white privilege, about the narrative, about how effective framing can be when discussing charged topics, and the way the mainstream left seems to present the thesis that if you don't agree with them, it's because you're a crazy person. So let's dive in. Second paragraph, see if it gets any better. Speaking of white privilege, they were told that yes, white privilege is a thing, and it's pretty obvious. They fumed and feigned outrage at this accurate report on the state of the real world until they convinced themselves that it was a huge lie and an outrage. Coached by their favorite enablers in the media, they worked themselves up into an emotional lather until they could act their parts somewhat convincingly, even with all the unrealistic lines. Think of the Stanislavski method in acting, except this was the Limbaugh method of acting out. Today we're going to focus on two concepts that are being elucidated, let's use a fun big word, by the author in this paragraph. The first is something that you find quite often in media, which is projection. The author is describing to you what he feels about someone else, except that he can't really understand that other person. He doesn't really understand that person. And so he imprints himself upon that other person, thereby enabling him to feel like he understands them and also defending his own negative emotions he can't quite wrap his mind around by ascribing those negative emotions to his opponent. We discussed this yesterday when the author lamented the fact that we used to all live in something like the same reality, and now we're all fractured. And he ascribed that to the right, even though it is the left that explicitly supports the abandonment of objective truth, of an understanding of objective reality, instead telling people to embrace their truth. He's taking the negative effects of abandoning objective reality and projecting it onto his opponents. And he does it again. They fumed and feigned outrage at this accurate report on the state of the real world until they convinced themselves it was a huge lie. He's continuing his thesis and expanding on it by claiming that the leftist view of the world is accurate. It is the accurate view of the world. Except ironically enough, if you were to present to him the idea that there is an objective standard of beauty, that there is an objective right answer, that 2 + 2 = 4, he would argue that mathematics is racist, that fat is beautiful, that it's all about your opinion. It's all about, in this postmodern world, it's all about what feels right to you. In other words, he would not only hold that your perspective on objective truth is wrong, but that the idea of objective truth is wrong. But here, when it's convenient for him, he explains that his view is the, accurate report on the state of the real world. He's talking about how his opponents, coached by their favorite enablers in the media, worked themselves up into an emotional lather until they could act their parts somewhat convincingly. It's amazing to me how the left uses these charged words, these charged language, to ascribe certain motivations to their opponents. That it's white supremacy, that it's fat phobia, that it's Islamophobia, that it's, they apply clinical designators and or negative labels that describe an aroused emotional state to their opponents. And this is a theme throughout this article, because never at any time through this article does he even state as a hypothetical possibility that his opponents object to progressive politics from a rational basis. This paragraph explains that everyone on the right, everyone who is a Republican, those are not synonymous terms, but he's being a little vague and he wants to kind of catch everybody in that bucket the way he's presenting. That everyone in that space is someone worked up in an emotional lather, acting with feigned outrage, convincing yourself that reality is a lie, That's what the left does. That is literally what the left does by manipulating public sentiment. They create chunks of the population that believe a huge lie about reality, that become outraged over that lie, and that work themselves up into an emotional lather by being fed a concerted lie through, what's the term he used? I actually like that term. By being coached by their favorite enablers in the media. This is the leftist progressive media playbook. This is what they do. Now, I thought for a long time I would never really find much success as a YouTuber, and maybe I won't, because I'm boring. Because I don't get worked up. I have a pretty stable personality. I'm in a job that is boring by design. Boring is a feature in the line of work that I've chosen. I generally don't get worked up. And somehow, I find myself able to disagree with the leftist narrative, even though I'm not acting my lines, even though I pay very little attention to Republican media outlets, even though I pay less attention to the left. Somehow, as an independent citizen, I've arrived at conclusions that run counter to the narrative, and I'm able to explain and espouse and push forward those conclusions that I've drawn, even though they run counter to the narratives from both political parties. How could this be a thing? I am the case that disproves his whole thesis, because I know for sure I'm not alone. There are a lot of people out there who are independent of both political parties because they recognize that both political parties are cynical manipulators of the American public to enrich themselves. I'm going to offer one more thought when it comes to this idea of projection and this idea of, I'm going to extend this idea of projection one step further, and that is this. If you abandon objective reality and instead you accept the idea that everyone has their own truth, that we view the world through our own personal lens, that we have a subjective reality that rules or trumps over everything else. One, you've created a fractured society because now we no longer have a common base of experience, a common base of moral values that we can all stand on. Now everything has to be argued because everyone sees the world a little bit differently. That's how we're designed. But secondly, it also means, it explains to me why in media you see them describe how important it is for representation, how important it is for people to say, oh, I need to be able to see myself in the actor. I need diversity. I need to see someone who looks like me in this fantasy story, in this comic book story, in this retelling of a drama. We need to recast it so that so that my identity can be on the screen. And the reason for that is because if you embrace a subjective reality, you lose the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. Because you literally can't see the world the way they see it. Both of you can negotiate a common principle, a common foundation for your viewpoint. That's what our culture used to have. That is neither my position nor your position, but an accepted upon common ground. That can be done. If you narrow the world and abandon the objective reality and say everyone, their experience is trumped by their own subjective experience. Now you've robbed them of the ability to empathize with their neighbor. Now you've robbed them of their ability to see someone else and accept their experience as common to your own. Now it's fundamentally different because their identity is different, their lived experience is different, their truth is different. And so you live in a world where you need to see someone who looks like you. You need to be, if you are in an aroused emotional state, you need to think that everyone else is in the same emotional state or is similarly wrapped up in their emotions and in their thinking. In order to empathize with them, things must be the same. You've lost your ability to use reason to put yourself in another person's shoes. It's going to have some downsides in our particular political environment, but that's my Reddit rant for today. Good luck out there.